My spouse declared, "Stop acting like you possess me. You don't dictate my movements or who I'm with." Everyone snickered. I just grinned and spoke, "Precisely. We're not together anymore." When he arrived home later that night, his key didn't function. The front locks had been changed. The neighbor shared a fact he'd never forget. Can you imagine standing there, frozen, your heart pounding, while your husband publicly shreds your marriage to pieces? I counted every agonizing second. 17 seconds of laughter. 17 seconds that shattered everything I thought I knew. What the hell happened next? It was 5:45 a.m. the morning after that horror show. I was in our gorgeous 19th floor apartment making Carter's coffee. My hands moved with this weird, almost mechanical precision, like I was planning a careful demolition. A locksmith's business card was tucked in my pocket, already crinkled from my tight grip. My phone buzzed with 3 missed calls from the divorce attorney I'd already contacted, from the parking lot no less. Those 17 seconds of laughter still echoed in my ears, but this time they weren't humiliating me. They were fueling me. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar morning song. Carter was still sound asleep in our bedroom, totally oblivious, blissfully unaware that his theatrical performance last night had triggered something irreversible in me. 2 sugars, no cream. I'd made that exact combination 5,110 times over 14 years. This would be the very last. My hands went through the motions while my mind replayed every single detail from the party. Brad, one of Carter's sleazy work buddies, clinking his whiskey glass against Carter's after the declaration, like they'd rehearsed my humiliation. Stephanie from accounting, trying so hard not to look at Carter, her pink nails tapping a frantic rhythm on her clutch. The room had smelled of cinnamon and expensive cologne when my entire world cracked right down the middle. Beyond our floor-to-ceiling windows, the Minneapolis skyline stretched out, buildings piercing through the morning fog like accusations. This apartment? It was my father's final gift, his inheritance. Carter, though, had somehow rebranded it as our investment, despite never contributing a single penny. My consulting business, which I'd built from nothing while putting him through his MBA, paid for everything here. Yet over the years, the narrative had twisted. Carter started talking about his apartment, his view, his success story. My name might have been on the deed, but possession, I was learning, was more about perception than paperwork. I heard him stir in the bedroom, the expensive sheets rustling. Egyptian cotton, 1,000 thread count, bought with my year-end bonus while he complained about my excessive spending. The irony wasn't lost on me anymore. Nothing was lost on me after last night's brutal clarity. Ruby? His voice, that particular morning roughness that once made my stomach flutter. Now it just sounded like gravel. Coffee ready? On the counter, I called back, my voice steady as a morning news anchor delivering tragedy. I listened to his footsteps padding across the hardwood floors we'd argued about. He wanted marble. I wanted warmth. We compromised on hardwood, which really just meant I paid for something neither of us truly wanted. He emerged from the bedroom in his Princeton boxer shorts, nothing else. His shoulder muscles rolled as he stretched. Carter maintained his body with the dedication of someone who believed physical perfection could compensate for character deficiencies. At 41, he still looked like the man I'd married at 27, except now I could see past the surface to the hollow architecture beneath. What time did you get home last night? He didn't even look at me as he grabbed his mug. The question was casual, like weather commentary. Around 11, I lied easily. In reality, I'd spent 2 hours in the parking garage, making calls and crying off my carefully applied makeup. Then, I'd sat in our lobby until 2 a.m., having a conversation with Harold, our doorman, that changed everything I thought I knew about Tuesday afternoons. Carter grunted his acknowledgement, already scrolling through his phone. Brad's sending over the investment paperwork today. Need your signature by 5. The words hung between us like last night's humiliation. Brad's startup was some cryptocurrency venture that sounded like money laundering dressed up in tech bro vocabulary. They wanted my father's inheritance, that $400,000 that represented 30 years of his work as a construction foreman. His callous hands and broken back transformed into my financial security. Carter had been pushing it for weeks, each time more insistent, less asking than informing. I want to see the business plan first, I said. Same as yesterday, same as last week. He looked up then, his blue eyes narrowing with that particular blend of condescension and irritation I'd grown so accustomed to. We've been over this, Ruby. Brad went to Wharton. He knows what he's doing. So did the executives at Enron, I shot back. Carter's jaw tightened. He set down his mug with deliberate control, the sound sharp against the granite counter. Why do you always have to make things difficult? This is why I said what I said last night. There it was. The bridge between last night's public humiliation and this morning's gaslighting. I'd learned to recognize his patterns. Humiliate, then blame me for the humiliation. Demand, then accuse me of being demanding. Take, then paint me as selfish for noticing. You're right, I said, my words smooth as the silk blouse I'd worn to my execution. I shouldn't try to control things. Like my own inheritance, or my own life. He missed the edge in my voice, already confident in his victory. Exactly. When you're reasonable, everything works better. He walked over, pressed a kiss to my forehead that felt less like affection and more like a stamp of ownership. Wear that burgundy dress again tonight. There's another party at the Marriott client thing. My stomach turned. The same dress as last night? It looked good on you. Powerful, he said, the last word with a smirk, remembering the saleswoman's comment I'd foolishly shared with him. Besides, these clients weren't at yesterday's party. No one will know it's the same dress, except I would know. I'd be wearing my humiliation like a uniform, a walking reminder of 17 seconds of laughter. That's when I finally understood. He wanted me to wear it. He wanted me marked by last night, branded by his public declaration of independence, while he played devoted husband tonight. I'll think about it, I said, my voice as neutral as Switzerland. He was already walking back to the bedroom, dismissing me with the confidence of someone who'd never had his locks changed. Don't overthink it, Ruby, it's just a dress. But it wasn't just a dress. It was everything. Every small surrender, every swallowed objection. Every time I'd made myself smaller so he could feel bigger. The burgundy dress was just the latest uniform in a long line of costumes I'd worn in the theater of our marriage, where Carter directed every scene, and I'd forgotten I could walk off stage. My phone buzzed. Alexandra, the divorce attorney. Room in my schedule at noon if you're ready to proceed. I looked at the locksmith's card on the counter, then at Carter's coffee mug with his lip print on the rim, and finally at the sunrise painting our apartment gold. Everything looked different in this light. Temporary, changeable, like a stage set waiting to be struck. Actually, I called toward the bedroom, loud enough for him to hear over his shower. I know exactly what I'm wearing tonight. What he didn't know was that I'd be wearing it in my apartment, with my locks, living my life. The 17 seconds of laughter had stopped echoing. What remained was the steady, certain sound of my own heartbeat, counting down to freedom. Carter's hand pressed harder against my lower back as we entered the Marriott's grand ballroom, his fingers spreading across the burgundy fabric like he was marking territory. But the pressure felt different now. Not protective, but possessive, the way someone might grip a briefcase full of money. The room sparkled with holiday decorations that someone had spent a fortune on. Gold garlands, crystal centerpieces, enough twinkling lights to power a small neighborhood. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with bourbon, and that particular scent of corporate ambition, sharp, metallic, desperate. Remember, Carter murmured against my ear, his breath hot with the whiskey he'd already consumed in the limo. These are important clients. Try to be pleasant. Pleasant? The word stuck in my throat like swallowed glass. After last night's humiliation, after 17 seconds of his colleagues laughing at me, he wanted pleasant? I was about to respond when I saw her. Stephanie from accounting, standing near the bar in a burgundy dress so similar to mine, it couldn't be coincidence. The neckline plunged lower, the hem rose higher, but the color was identical. She stood with her back to us, blonde hair cascading down her spine like a waterfall of betrayal. Melissa, Brad's wife, appeared at my elbow with 2 champagne flutes. Her eyes darted between Stephanie and me, her face cycling through expressions like a slot machine before landing on pity. "Ruby, you look lovely," she said, handing me a glass while obviously struggling not to stare at the matching dresses. "Interesting color choice tonight," I said, my voice steady as I watched Carter notice Stephanie. His hand fell from my back instantly, like I'd suddenly become radioactive. His pupils dilated, jaw slackened, and for 3 agonizing seconds, he forgot I existed. In those 3 seconds, I saw our entire marriage. Every late meeting. Every Tuesday afternoon. Every text he'd hidden by tilting his phone away. Stephanie turned then, her eyes meeting mine over Carter's shoulder. She had the decency to look uncomfortable. her cheeks flushing as she registered our matching dresses. But she didn't move away. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly. A silent declaration of war disguised as confidence. The diamonds in her ears, new, expensive, and devastatingly familiar, caught the light. They looked exactly like the ones Carter had said were for his mother's birthday last month. "Those are beautiful earrings," I said to Melissa, though my eyes never left Stephanie. "Amazing how some women can wear expensive jewelry to work events. Must be nice to have that kind of income." Melissa coughed into her champagne. Brad materialized beside his wife, his face already flushed with alcohol and barely contained excitement. "Carter, ready to make history with this startup?" "Just need Ruby's signature and we're golden." My signature. My father's money. My inheritance funding their boys' club fantasy, while Carter's mistress stood 10 feet away, wearing my color and his diamonds. The room suddenly felt too hot, too bright, too full of people who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook with legs. "We should discuss the business plan first," I said, my voice cutting through their enthusiasm like cold water. "I haven't seen any documentation. No revenue projections, no market analysis. Nothing but promises and Wharton credentials." Carter's face darkened, that particular shade of red that preceded his worst moments. "Ruby, we've discussed this." "No, you've talked." "I've listened. There's a difference." I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles give me courage. "It's $400,000, Carter. My father's—" "Our money," he interrupted, his voice rising enough that nearby conversations paused. "It's our money, Ruby, or have you forgotten what marriage means?" Brad laughed nervously, trying to diffuse the tension. "Hey, let's not turn business into what?" I asked, turning to face him fully. "Into due diligence? Into protecting assets? Into asking basic questions about where nearly $500,000 is going?" The room had grown quieter. That particular hush that falls when people sense drama brewing. Stephanie had moved closer, pretending to examine a painting on the wall while obviously eavesdropping. Her perfume, something French and excessive, made my stomach turn. Carter grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You're embarrassing me," he hissed. "I'm embarrassing you?" The laugh that escaped me sounded hollow, brittle. "That's rich considering last night." His grip tightened. "Last night was nothing." "You're being dramatic." 17 seconds, I said quietly. "Your colleagues laughed at me for 17 seconds because you were being controlling." His voice boomed now, all pretense of privacy abandoned. The jazz quartet actually stopped playing, the saxophone cutting off mid-note. "You always do this, Ruby. You act like you own me, like I can't make a single decision without your permission." The entire room was watching now. 50, maybe 60 people in designer clothes, holding drinks worth more than most people's daily wages, all witnessing round 2 of my public humiliation. Stephanie had turned fully toward us, her expression unreadable, but her body language screaming anticipation. Carter's finger jabbed toward my chest, not quite touching, but close enough to feel aggressive. "Stop acting like you own me, Ruby. You don't get to tell me where I go or who I'm with." There were the same words as last night, but this time with an audience of clients instead of colleagues. This time with his mistress watching. This time with everyone waiting to see if I'd crumble or fight. The champagne flute in my hand trembled slightly as I set it down on the nearest table. The click of glass on marble sounded like a gavel falling inside me. I was fragmenting into a million pieces. 14 years of marriage, of trying, of making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. All shattering at once. But outside, my hands were steady, my voice clear. "You're right," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're not together anymore." The silence that followed was complete. Absolute. The kind that makes your ears ring. Carter's triumphant expression, because he thought he was winning this public argument, shifted to confusion. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish gasping for air. "What did you just say?" His voice cracked on the last word. I repeated, meeting his eyes head on. "You're right. I don't own you, and you don't own me. We're done." I turned away from his shocked face. From Stephanie's barely concealed satisfaction. From Melissa's horrified sympathy. From Brad's uncomfortable shuffling. My heels clicked against the marble floor, steady, rhythmic, final. Each step felt like shedding weight, like gravity was loosening its grip. Behind me, I heard Sarah from IT whisper to someone, "Good for her." Then, louder, clearly meant for me to hear, "Good for you, Ruby." I didn't stop walking until I reached my car in the parking garage. The December air bit at my skin, snow beginning to fall in thick, lazy flakes that stuck to my hair, my dress, my shaking hands as I fumbled for my keys. Inside the car, I sat for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. Then I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls, each one a nail in the coffin of my old life. Alexandra answered on the second ring. "Ruby, it's late. Are you—" "I'm ready," I said. "Can you file papers tomorrow?" Her pause was brief. Then, finally, "I've been waiting years for this call. I'll have everything ready by morning." The second call was to Secure Life Emergency Locksmith. Diana's voice was warm, understanding. "We can have someone there tonight. Changing locks after midnight is our specialty." The third call was to Marcus, my brother, who managed a storage facility. "I need a unit," I said without preamble. "How big?" No questions, no surprise. Just immediate support. "Big enough for a man's entire life. I'll have one ready by midnight." "Ruby, good for you." 3 calls. 3 allies. 3 steps toward freedom. As I drove home through the falling snow, watching the city lights blur through my tears, I realized something. Carter had been right about one thing. I had been trying to control something. I'd been trying to control myself, to make myself fit into the shape of what he needed. Tonight, in front of everyone who mattered to his image, I'd finally let go of that control. And in losing it, I'd found something else entirely. Myself. The snow had turned to freezing rain by the time I reached our building, each drop hitting my windshield like tiny bullets of reality. Through the lobby's glass doors, I could see Harold at his desk, and something in his posture told me he'd been waiting. I parked in my designated spot, 19F, same as our apartment, and sat for a moment, gathering the courage to walk through those doors as a woman about to dismantle her life. Harold stood as I entered, his weathered face carrying an expression I'd never seen before. Part relief, part sorrow, like watching someone finally escape a burning building. "Miss Thorne," he said, using my maiden name without my having to ask. The locksmith called. "She's on her way up." I gave her access to the service elevator. He paused, studying my face. I also took the liberty of putting extra boxes in the hallway. The good ones from the storage room. At 10:04 p.m. exactly, Diana arrived with a battered toolbox and eyes that had seen too many midnight escapes. She was perhaps 50, with silver streaking through her dark hair and calluses on her hands that spoke of real work. She didn't offer empty condolences or ask unnecessary questions. Instead, she knelt by our door and ran her fingers along the lock like a doctor examining a patient. "Commercial grade," she said, pulling out her tools. "Good bones, but outdated. Your husband never upgraded the security features, did he?" The question was rhetorical. She was already working. Metal sang against metal. Men like that never think anyone would dare lock them out. Makes my job easier. As she worked, her story unfolded in quiet fragments between the sounds of pins clicking and tumblers turning. Her ex had locked her out 17 years ago. Changed the locks while she was at her mother's funeral. Came home to my entire life on the lawn, in garbage bags, in the rain. Learned locksmithing after that. Figured if I couldn't control much else, I could at least control who got through my door. She tested the new deadbolt, solid and unforgiving. "Military grade," she said with satisfaction. "These babies can't be duplicated at some corner shop. You want copies? You come through me." She pulled out a business card. "My personal number's on the back. For emergencies, or just to talk." While Diana packed her tools, I began the systematic archaeology of ending a marriage. Each item of Carter's required examination, classification, preservation. His Harvard MBA diploma, which he'd insisted on hanging in our bedroom for inspiration, went into bubble wrap. I grabbed a Sharpie and wrote on the box, "Educated but not enlightened." The Rolex I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary, 3 months of my consulting fees, went into its original box with a note. "Time's up." My movements were methodical, almost therapeutic. Each labeled box was a small act of revolution. His collection of first edition business books became unread trophies. The golf clubs he bought with what he called his bonus, but was actually our tax refund, were tagged borrowed dreams. Then behind his golf bag, my fingers found something that stopped me cold. A pink cashmere scarf, soft and expensive, reeking of Stephanie's perfume. I held it up to the light. This evidence of Tuesday afternoons I'd pretended not to know about. Instead of rage, I felt something closer to relief. Confirmation was its own kind of freedom. I folded it carefully, placed it in its own box, and labeled it Tuesday afternoons. Personal property of your accounting department. Harold appeared in my doorway, having used his master key. I brought a dolly, he said simply, then began loading boxes without being asked. We worked in comfortable silence until he finally spoke, his words careful, but necessary. Miss Thorne, I need to tell you something. He adjusted a box, not meeting my eyes. I've worked here 15 years. Seen all kinds of people, all kinds of marriages. Your husband. He thinks because he tips well at Christmas, gives me Celtics tickets sometimes, that I'm blind. But I see everything. Every Tuesday when you're at Pilates, that woman from his office comes here. Takes the service elevator. Stays exactly 90 minutes. The information should have hurt, but it just felt like confirmation of a test I'd already passed. How long? I asked. 6 months, maybe 7. Started right after your father's funeral. He finally looked at me, anger flashing in his usually kind eyes. You deserve better than a man who can't even cheat with dignity. At least have the decency to go to a hotel, not the bed his wife sleeps in. We continued packing, Harold's revelations settling over me like armor. My hands moved faster now with purpose. The wedding photo on our dresser gave me pause. We looked so young, so certain. I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes to mourn those people, to grieve the couple who'd believed in forever. Then I wrapped it in newspaper and added it to a box labeled Fiction, a love story. By 11:30 p.m., the apartment looked like a crime scene where only one person's belongings had been murdered. Every trace of Carter had been boxed, labeled, and moved to the hallway. I sat at my laptop, crafting the email that would serve as both evidence and manifesto. The subject line read, Transparency and Truth, a Necessary Update. The email itself was surgical in its precision. I attached the security footage Sarah from IT had secretly sent me. Carter's public humiliation of me at the party, his finger jabbing, his voice carrying over the jazz quartet. The video showed him toasting with Brad afterward, celebrating what he thought was his victory. I added screenshots of credit card statements showing his Tuesday afternoon hotel charges, the ones he thought I didn't know about because he used the emergency card. The recipient list was comprehensive. Both sets of parents, his boss, our entire friend circle, his HR department, and because I was feeling particularly thorough, the company's board of directors email list that Carter had left open on our shared computer. My finger hovered over the schedule send button. 2:30 a.m. seemed right, late enough that he'd be locked out and drunk, early enough that people would read it with their morning coffee. Diana had finished installing the new lock mechanism on the door. All done, she announced, testing the handle one final time. Your fortress is secure. I walked her to the elevator, Harold following with her tools. As we waited, Diana turned to me with eyes that understood everything without explanation. The first night's the hardest, she said quietly. You'll want to undo it all. To go back to the familiar pain. Don't. Tomorrow you'll wake up and realize the air tastes different when you're not suffocating. The elevator arrived and she stepped in with Harold, who was heading back to his desk. Just before the doors closed, Harold said, I'll be at my desk all night, Miss Thorne. If you need anything, even just to know someone else is awake. I stood in the hallway, surrounded by the boxes containing Carter's life, my phone in my hand with the email ready to send. The apartment behind me was mine now. Legally, it always had been, but now it felt true. At exactly 11:45 p.m., I pressed send, watching the confirmation message appear. Email scheduled successfully. 15 minutes to midnight. In 2 hours and 45 minutes, Carter would discover his keys didn't work. In 2 hours and 46 minutes, everyone would know why. For now, though, I had these 15 minutes of perfect quiet, standing in my hallway with my new keys, heavy and real in my hand. The locks had been changed, the emails scheduled, the boxes packed. The midnight operation was complete, and I was finally secure. Midnight arrived with the soft chime of Margaret Henderson's grandmother clock, the sound drifting through the thin wall between our apartments. I stood alone in my newly secured space, running my fingers over the fresh keys Diana had left, when I heard a door open in the hallway. Through my peephole, I watched Margaret emerge from 19G in an emerald silk robe and matching slippers, carrying a silver tea service, as if midnight visits were perfectly routine. She paused at the boxes lining the hallway, examining my labels with the careful attention of someone appraising evidence. Her fingers traced the words on one box, Tuesday afternoons, and a knowing smile crossed her face. She knocked on my door with 3 precise taps. Miss Thorne! she said when I opened the door, using my maiden name without explanation. "I believe we have some time before the main event. Would you join me for tea?" Her apartment was exactly what I'd imagined. Book-lined walls, oriental rugs over hardwood, and the kind of furniture that whispered old money and good taste. She set the tea service on a mahogany coffee table and gestured for me to sit in a wing-back chair that probably cost more than Carter's monthly car payment. "I was a judge for 30 years, Margaret said, pouring Earl Grey with steady hands. "Presided over every kind of human cruelty you can imagine. But the cases that haunted me weren't the dramatic ones, the crimes of passion or sudden violence. It was the slow erosion of a woman's spirit. The daily diminishment disguised as marriage." She handed me a delicate china cup. "That's the worst kind of cruelty, because it teaches you to be complicit in your own destruction." She moved to an antique secretary desk and pulled out a manila folder, thick with papers and photographs. "I started documenting your husband's activity 6 months ago. Not out of nosiness, you understand, but out of concern." She spread the contents across the coffee table, photographs with timestamps, dates carefully noted in her precise handwriting. "Every Tuesday, 1:15 p.m., the blonde arrives separately, takes the service elevator. Your husband follows 10 minutes later. They leave the same way, separately, around 2:45. The evidence was overwhelming in its finality. Carter in the lobby checking his phone. Stephanie entering with an oversized purse. The two of them accidentally captured in the same frame near the elevator, carefully not acknowledging each other. Margaret had built a case with the thoroughness of someone who understood how truth needed documentation to become justice. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was you once," Margaret said simply. 40 years ago. Different husbands, same story, but back then nobody documented anything. Nobody helped. Women just disappeared into their marriages, and nobody asked questions until they turned up in my courtroom, broken and without proof." She touched one of the photographs. "I promised myself I'd never let another woman go through that alone if I could help it." At 2:23 a.m., we heard the elevator ding. Margaret moved to her door, pressing her eye to the peephole with practiced ease. "He's here," she whispered, gesturing for me to join her. Through the fisheye lens, I watched Carter stumble down the hallway, his gait uneven from alcohol and arrogance. His keycard beeped against the lock. Once, twice, 3 times. The confusion on his face would have been comical if it weren't so satisfying. He tried the handle, shaking it with increasing force. "Ruby!" His voice was slurred but demanding. "Ruby, open the door!" He progressed from confusion to irritation to anger in the span of 30 seconds. "This isn't funny! Open the door right now!" Margaret looked at me, one eyebrow raised in question. I nodded. She opened her door with theatrical calm, teacup in hand, looking every inch the distinguished retired judge despite the late hour. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the bench. "Having trouble?" Carter spun toward her, nearly losing his balance. "My key, it's not working." "How curious," Margaret said, taking a deliberate sip of tea. Though I suppose it makes sense. Keys generally stop working when one no longer lives somewhere. The color drained from his face as he noticed the boxes lining the hallway, his name on every label. "What is this?" "I believe the legal term is personal property removal," Margaret said, though I particularly enjoyed the labeling system. Tuesday afternoons was especially creative. She gestured toward the pink scarf box. "Your friend Stephanie left that behind last week. Rather careless of her?" Carter's phone began buzzing incessantly. The 2:30 a.m. email had landed. He pulled it out, his face illuminated by the screen as notification after notification popped up. His mother. His boss, sir, the entire board of directors. His expressions cycled through shock, rage, and finally desperation. "She sent it to everyone," he whispered. Then louder, directed at my door. "You sent it to everyone." He started pounding on the door with both fists. "You can't do this. This is my home. I have rights." His voice cracked with rage and humiliation. Margaret calmly pulled out her phone and began recording. "Please continue your performance, Mr. Lawson. I'm sure Ruby's attorney will find this very helpful." Threatening behavior. Attempted forced entry. Intoxicated aggression. It's all quite compelling. Carter froze mid-pound, finally noticing the security camera mounted discreetly in the corner, the one I'd installed last month after sensing something shifting in our marriage. His bravado crumbled instantly. The man who'd humiliated me in front of colleagues, who'd declared his independence from our marriage, actually whimpered. Margaret and I exchanged a look through her doorway that spoke volumes about the particular fragility of men who mistake control for strength. She continued recording as Carter sank to his knees in front of the door, his voice shifting to pleading. "Ruby, please. Let's talk about this. We can work it out." "I believe she already tried talking," Margaret said without missing a beat. "At 2 separate company events if the video evidence is accurate. You chose public humiliation instead of private conversation. Now you're experiencing the consequences of that choice." Carter gathered his boxes with shaking hands, muttering about lawyers and unfair treatment. As the elevator doors closed on his defeated figure, Margaret turned to me. "Would you like to watch the sunrise? I make excellent coffee to go with dawn revelations." We settled by her window, the city still dark but beginning to stir. Margaret pulled out a photo album, opening to a page from 1983. A younger version of herself stood in judicial robes, fierce and solitary. "My first husband was a surgeon," she said. "Brilliant, charming, and systematically cruel. He made me feel small for being smart, inadequate for being successful. It took me 10 years to realize the lock keeping me trapped wasn't on any door. It was in my head." She showed me another photo, her swearing-in ceremony as a judge. "The day after I left him, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in a decade. But it was lonely. Nobody talked about it then. Women just endured or escaped quietly. The sky began to lighten, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. Your generation is different," Margaret continued. "You document. You share. You refuse to disappear quietly into bad marriages." She raised her coffee cup toward me. "To locks that change, both physical and mental." We sat in comfortable silence, 2 women from different generations, bound by the same understanding. The city woke around us, and somewhere out there, Carter was discovering that his world had fundamentally shifted while he slept off his arrogance. The reckoning had come, not with dramatics, but with dignity, witnessed by a woman who understood that justice sometimes looks like Earl Grey tea and carefully documented truth. Margaret's coffee had grown cold in my hands as the first rays of sunlight painted Minneapolis in shades of gold and amber. We sat in comfortable silence, 2 women who understood that some victories taste better when shared quietly. Then, at exactly 7 a.m., my phone shattered the peace with a ringtone I'd designed specifically to avoid. Patricia Lawson, Carter's mother. I looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. "Sometimes the most surprising allies come from unexpected places," she said softly. Patricia's voice, usually sharp with disapproval and thick with Connecticut breeding, trembled like autumn leaves. "Ruby, I've seen the email. The video, everything." A pause so long I thought the connection had dropped. "What has my son done?" For 14 years, this woman had treated me like the help who'd somehow tricked her precious Carter into marriage. She'd made comments about my father's blue-collar background, suggested I take etiquette classes, and once told her garden club friends that Carter had married down for love. Poor thing. Now her voice carried something I'd never heard before. Shame. "He did exactly what you raised him to believe he could do," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "Take what he wanted without consequences." The sharp intake of breath on the other end might have been a sob. "I raised him better than this. His father would be appalled." "His father was having an affair with his secretary when he died, Patricia. Carter learned from the best." The silence stretched between us. Years of pretense crumbling in seconds. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smaller, older. "I suspected. But I couldn't face it. Just like I couldn't face what Carter was becoming." "I'm keeping the Christmas china you gave me," I said, looking at the morning light dancing across Margaret's coffee table. "It's the only thing from your family worth holding on to." Another pause, heavy with unspoken acknowledgments. "Keep it all, dear," she whispered. "The silver, the crystal, everything I insisted you weren't good enough to inherit. You earned it by surviving him." She hung up without goodbye, but somehow it felt like the most honest conversation we'd ever had. My phone immediately buzzed with another call. Sarah from IT, her voice electric with vindication. "Ruby, you're not going to believe what I found." "Actually, scratch that." "You probably will." Margaret poured fresh coffee as I put Sarah on speaker, her judicial instincts clearly interested in evidence. "After I saw that video last night, I did some digging with my admin access," Sarah continued. "Your husband's been using company resources for everything. Hotel rooms booked as client meetings, expensive dinners expensed as business development. I tracked his corporate card. Every Tuesday afternoon at the Marriott. Charged to the Henderson account. Margaret raised an eyebrow at the mention of the Henderson account. That's our biggest client, she mouthed. It gets worse, Sarah said, her typing audible through the phone. That startup he's been pushing, the one with Brad? I found the incorporation documents. It doesn't exist. Brad's been investigated for fraud twice. Once in Boston, once in Chicago. The whole thing was a con to get your inheritance. My legs went weak. I sank into Margaret's wingback chair, the weight of what I'd almost lost crushing down on me. $400,000. My father's life's work, nearly stolen by the man who'd vowed to protect me. I forwarded everything to HR and Mr. Davidson, Sarah continued, referring to Carter's boss. Also sent copies to the SEC whistleblower department. The fraud division loves this kind of thing. By the time I ended the call, my phone was already exploding with messages. The digital unraveling of Carter's reputation was happening in real time. Each text a thread pulled from his carefully woven image. Jennifer from legal. We never liked how he talked about you. Like you were an accessory he'd purchased. Tom from sales. That video was brutal. You handled it with more class than he deserved. Even Brad's wife, Melissa. I'm leaving him too. Found out about the fraud investigation. You inspired me to stop ignoring red flags. But the message that stopped me cold came from Mr. Davidson himself. Miss Thorne, I apologize for our company culture that enabled this behavior. Mr. Lawson's employment is under review pending investigation of expense fraud. Would you consider consulting for us? We could use someone with your dignity and strategic thinking. Please call at your convenience. I screenshot everything, creating my own evidence folder. Alexandra would want documentation of the complete collapse. At 10 a.m., Harold called from the lobby. Miss Thorne, there's a flower delivery here. 3 dozen roses. I've refused them, as you requested, but the delivery guy says they're paid for and he can't take them back. Donate them to the hospital, I said. Tell them they're from an anonymous donor who's celebrating freedom. With pleasure, Harold replied. Also, there's a young man here who says he's Mr. Lawson's brother. Should I send him away? Denny, Carter's younger brother, the one who just finished law school. Send him up, I said, curious what Carter had promised him. Margaret offered to leave, but I asked her to stay. Witnesses are always valuable, she said with a judge's wisdom. Denny arrived looking uncomfortable. His resemblance to Carter softened by genuine embarrassment. He stood in Margaret's doorway, shifting his weight like a child called to the principal's office. Ruby, I'm sorry to bother you. Carter said if I came here and talked to you, he'd pay off my student loans. $70,000. He met my eyes with difficulty. But I'm guessing that's not happening, is it? He doesn't have $70,000, I said gently. He's been living off my income for 2 years. His salary barely covers his car payment and his wardrobe. Denny's face went through several expressions before landing on anger. That lying piece of... He caught himself, glancing at Margaret. Sorry, he told me you were the one overspending. That you were bleeding him dry with your shopping habits. My shopping habits consist of buying groceries and occasionally replacing worn-out work clothes, I said. Would you like some coffee? There are things about your brother you should probably know. Over the next hour, Denny revealed more pieces of Carter's hidden history. The gambling debts from his MBA days that Patricia had quietly paid. The previous engagement to a banker's daughter that ended when her father discovered Carter's lies about his family's wealth. The investment schemes at his first job that HR buried to avoid scandal. I always wondered why he was so secretive about certain things, Denny said, staring into his coffee. Now it makes sense. He wasn't protecting family privacy. He was protecting his con game. As Denny left, he turned at the door. Ruby, for what it's worth, the family knew you were too good for him. Even Mom, though she'd never admit it. We just didn't know how to tell you. The unraveling was complete. By noon, Carter's carefully constructed world had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. His reputation, his job, his family's illusions, his financial schemes, everything exposed in the harsh light of truth. And I sat in Margaret's apartment, watching it all fall apart with a satisfaction that should have felt wrong, but didn't. Sometimes destruction is just another word for justice. Margaret's apartment had become my temporary command center by the time Alexandra arrived at 2 p.m., her leather briefcase containing the weaponry of legal warfare. She swept into the room with the confidence of someone who had dismantled marriages for 20 years, her navy suit as sharp as her strategy. Margaret offered to leave, but Alexandra waved her down. Stay, Alexandra said, pulling out color-coded folders. A retired judge as a witness? That's better than a signed confession. She spread documents across Margaret's dining table like a general mapping battle plans. The video from the party is gold. Your testimony, Judge Henderson, is platinum. But Sarah's evidence of embezzlement. She tapped a folder marked fraud in red letters. That's diamonds. She walked me through the legal architecture of Carter's self-destruction. His public declaration at the party constituted constructive abandonment. The affair with Stephanie proved infidelity. The financial fraud? She smiled with professional satisfaction. That eliminates any claim to marital assets. He essentially played himself out of his own divorce. How long will this take? I asked, running my fingers over the evidence folders. Depends on our strategy. Alexandra pulled out 2 different timelines. Option 1, quick and clean. We file everything immediately. Push for summary judgment. You're divorced in 90 days. Option 2, we slow play it. Let him marinate in uncertainty while his world continues collapsing. I thought about 14 years of being told I was too emotional, too controlling, too much. 14 years of gaslighting disguised as concern. Make him sweat, I decided. He made me doubt my own reality for over a decade. Alexandra's smile turned predatory. Psychological warfare it is. At 3:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. Harold's voice carried unusual tension. Miss Thorne, there's a young woman here. Stephanie Mills. She says she has information you need. I looked at Alexandra, who nodded. Mistresses often become star witnesses, she said quietly. Let her up. Stephanie arrived looking nothing like the confident woman from the party. Her designer dress had been replaced with jeans and a wrinkled sweater. Her eyes were red-rimmed, mascara smudged, despite obvious attempts to clean it. She was younger than I'd realized, maybe 25, still carrying that post-college uncertainty about the world. I'm sorry, she said before even sitting down. I'm so sorry. Margaret, ever the hostess despite the circumstances, moved toward the kitchen. I'll make tea. Stephanie collapsed into a chair, tears flowing freely. I didn't know he was really married. I mean, I knew he was married, but he said you were separated, living separate lives. He said you were crazy, vindictive, that you were trying to take everything in the divorce. When did it start? I asked, surprised by my own steady voice. 8 months ago. He approached me at a conference in Chicago, said his marriage had been over for years, but his wife, you, wouldn't accept it. He painted himself as this victim, trapped by a controlling woman. She accepted the tea from Margaret with shaking hands. He was so convincing. He showed me around your apartment like he owned it. Talked about selling it after the divorce was final. Alexandra pulled out her phone. Would you be willing to repeat this on record? Stephanie nodded, wiping her nose with the tissue Margaret provided. He promised me everything. A promotion to senior accountant. Marriage once the divorce was done. A life together funded by the sale of the apartment. She looked directly at me. He said the inheritance from your father was actually his trust fund that you'd stolen. The calculated cruelty of his lies took my breath away. He'd inverted our entire reality to seduce a woman barely out of college. Alexandra recorded while Stephanie detailed dates, locations, promises made. Each revelation was another nail in Carter's legal coffin. There's more, Stephanie said, pulling out her phone. He sent me photos of jewelry he was going to buy me. Screenshots of real estate listings for our future home. All dated months ago, proving he was planning this while pretending to work on your marriage. My phone rang. Marcus, my brother, his voice tight with controlled fury. Ruby, you need to know something. I was organizing Carter's boxes in the storage unit when I found something in his golf bag. What kind of something? Bank statements. He has a separate account you don't know about. He's been siphoning money from your joint account for 3 years. Small amounts. $500 here, $800 there. It adds up to almost $40,000. The rage that flooded through me was different from the hurt of betrayal. This was clean, pure anger, like fire burning away the last threads connecting me to Carter. Send me photos of everything, I said. Already done, Ruby. I could handle this the family way. Make sure he understands consequences. No, I said firmly. The legal way will hurt him more. Criminal charges for embezzlement last longer than bruises. Thursday arrived with an email from Carter's lawyer requesting mediation. Alexandra laughed out loud when she read it. They want to avoid court. Good sign. Means they know they're losing. The mediation was scheduled for the following Monday in a sterile conference room downtown. I wore my best suit, not for Carter, but for myself. Armor for battle. Alexandra flanked me like a bodyguard. Carter entered wearing his Harvard tie, the one he wore to important meetings. His lawyer, an older man who looked exhausted already, followed behind. Carter's eyes were bloodshot. His usual confidence cracked, but not broken. He tried his old smile, the one that used to make me forgive everything. "Ruby," he started, voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "We can work this out. Remember what we had? Remember Paris?" I pulled out the folder Sarah had compiled, expense reports showing he charged our Paris anniversary trip to his company as client entertainment, while texting Stephanie from the Eiffel Tower. I slid it across the table without a word. His lawyer's face paled as he read. This could be criminal fraud." "It is criminal fraud," Alexandra confirmed, along with embezzlement from marital assets, constructive abandonment, and documented infidelity. Carter reached for my hand across the table. I pulled back as if his touch might infect me with his delusions. "Ruby, please. We had good times." "The only thing I remember," I said, my voice carrying the weight of finally spoken truth, "is paying for those good times while you plan to steal my inheritance." Alexandra leaned forward. "Here are our terms. Miss Thorne keeps all assets, including the apartment, savings, and investments. Mr. Lawson keeps nothing except his personal belongings, which have already been delivered to storage. He signs a comprehensive NDA preventing him from discussing the marriage or divorce. In exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges," Carter's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Words like fraud and prison cut through the murmur. Carter's face crumbled like old plaster finally giving way to water damage. The man who'd publicly humiliated me, who'd stolen from me, who'd planned to take everything while painting me as crazy, finally understood. He wasn't the one in control anymore. He never really had been. He'd just been living in the delusion I'd paid for, and now the bill had come due. Carter's pen hovered over the NDA agreement for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. His hand trembled slightly as he finally signed, the sound of ink on paper marking the legal death of our marriage. His lawyer gathered the documents with the efficiency of someone eager to leave, muttering about filing deadlines and court schedules. As they stood to leave, Carter looked at me one last time, his mouth opening as if to say something. But Alexandra raised her hand, pointing to the freshly signed NDA, and he closed it again, shuffling out like a man who'd aged a decade in an hour. 3 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and apartment reorganization. I reclaimed spaces that had been his, the home office where he'd conducted his Tuesday affairs via video calls. The walk-in closet that now held only my clothes spread out luxuriously. Margaret checked in daily, bringing tea and wisdom in equal measure. The building's residents had shifted from treating me as Carter's wife to Ruby Thorne, the woman who changed her own locks. The story had become building legend. New Year's Eve arrived with a snowstorm, and an invitation slipped under my door. The building's annual rooftop party, handwritten by Margaret herself. "You need to be seen thriving. It's not about him anymore. It's about you," I almost declined. The thought of facing a room full of people who'd witnessed my public humiliation felt overwhelming. But Margaret appeared at my door at 7 p.m. holding a jewelry box. "These were my late husband's cufflinks," she said, opening it to reveal diamonds that caught the light like trapped stars. "I had them made into earrings after he passed. He was a real man, the kind who supported his wife's success instead of stealing it." She fastened them to my ears with gentle fingers. "Wear them tonight. Let them remind you what actual partnership looked like." My dress choice was deliberate, not the burgundy of humiliation, not the black of mourning, but fire engine red. The kind of red that announces arrival, demands attention, declares war and victory simultaneously. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in 14 years. Not Carter's wife, or anyone's victim, but Ruby Thorne, 41 years old and finally fully alive. The rooftop venue sparkled with string lights and heat lamps fighting against the December cold. The moment I stepped off the elevator, conversation stuttered to a stop. Not the uncomfortable silence of scandal, but something else. Recognition, perhaps. Respect. Harold, dressed in his formal uniform, announced with unusual volume, "Ms. Ruby Thorne." The emphasis on my name was deliberate. Each syllable a declaration. The applause started with Margaret, of course, but spread through the crowd like wildfire. Dr. Kim from 12B raised her glass. The Johnsons from 8C nodded approvingly. Even the 20-somethings who usually ignored everyone over 30 were clapping. It took me a moment to understand. They weren't applauding my divorce or my drama. They were applauding my courage, the simple act of refusing to disappear quietly. I was 2 glasses of champagne into actual enjoyment when the elevator dinged at 10:47 p.m. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of dramatic timing. Carter stepped out with Stephanie on his arm, his chin raised in that way that meant he was pretending confidence. He wore his most expensive suit, the one I'd bought him for our 10th anniversary. Stephanie wore black, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The room's energy shifted immediately, but not in the way Carter had calculated. Conversations didn't stop. They deliberately continued, voices perhaps a bit louder, backs turning with synchronized precision. When he approached the bar, the bartender suddenly needed to check inventory in the back room. When he tried to join a group near the windows, they dispersed like smoke, reforming elsewhere. Stephanie's face cycled through mortification, to understanding, to shame. She wasn't his new girlfriend being introduced to society. She was a prop in his revenge fantasy, and everyone knew it. When she caught my eye across the room, her expression crumbled. This wasn't what he'd promised her. Carter, red-faced and desperate, made a beeline for me, but Harold materialized from nowhere, joined by 2 other doormen I'd never seen work an event before. They formed a subtle but unmistakable wall. "Sir," Harold said, his voice carrying across the now quiet rooftop. "You're not on the resident list. I'll have to ask you to leave unless a current resident vouches for you." The silence that followed was complete. 60 people, residents who'd lived here for years, who'd shared elevators and small talk with Carter, who'd attended his 4th of July parties. Not one person moved. Not one voice spoke up. The rejection was total, devastating in its unanimity. Carter's face went from red to purple. "This is ridiculous! I lived here for—" "Lived," Margaret interrupted, approaching with the authority of her former profession. "Past tense. The building's quite particular about security these days." At exactly midnight, as if orchestrated by fate, Margaret took the microphone for the traditional New Year's toast. The crowd turned toward her, effectively giving Carter their backs. She raised her champagne, diamonds glittering at her wrist, and spoke with the clarity of judgment. "To new beginnings," she started, her eyes finding mine across the crowd. "To women who realize their worth after years of being told they have none. To men who learn that consequences, like karma, always come due." She paused, taking a deliberate sip. "And to Miss Ruby Thorne, who reminded us all that sometimes the best renovation you can do to a home is removing the trash." The laughter that erupted wasn't cruel. It was cathartic, a collective release of tension. Glasses raised toward me from every direction. Someone started clapping again, and this time it sustained, growing into something that felt like vindication. Carter's composure finally shattered completely. "This is conspiracy. You've all been turned against me. This is illegal." But Margaret wasn't finished. She looked directly at him as if just noticing his presence. "Oh, Mr. Lawson, you're still here? How embarrassing for you." That's when Stephanie broke. She pulled away from Carter's arm, walked directly to me through the crowd that parted like water. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming. "I was an idiot. He played me just like—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I'm just sorry." She headed for the elevator without looking back. Carter, now alone and surrounded by people who'd collectively decided he didn't exist, began what could only be described as a meltdown. Sarah from IT had her phone out, recording with the steady hand of someone documenting history. He ranted about conspiracy, about his rights, about how we'd all ruined his life. "You ruined your own life," Margaret said calmly, her microphone still on. "Ruby just stopped being your cleanup crew. That's when building security arrived. Not the friendly doormen, but actual security, the kind they kept for real problems." As they flanked Carter, he made one last desperate proclamation. "I'll destroy you in court, Ruby. You'll get nothing." Alexandra, who'd been quietly sipping champagne in the corner, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. "With what money? Your assets are frozen pending fraud investigation. Your job is gone. Your mistress just publicly dumped you. Even your mother took Ruby's side." She raised her glass mockingly. "Happy New Year, Carter." As security escorted him out, the crowd turned back to me. Not with pity or awkwardness, but with something that felt like solidarity. Dr. Kim clinked her glass against mine. Best party we've had in years, she said with a wink. The countdown to midnight began again. Margaret had actually paused it for the drama. As the numbers decreased and the ball dropped on the screen, I stood surrounded by neighbors who'd become witnesses who'd become allies. The new year arrived with cheers and champagne, and for the first time in 14 years, I celebrated without wondering what mood Carter would be in tomorrow. The fireworks faded into smoke against the Minneapolis skyline as the rooftop party continued around me, but I felt myself existing in a bubble of perfect clarity. Margaret squeezed my hand once before releasing it, her eyes carrying the satisfaction of justice served. The new year had arrived, and with it the strange sensation of being completely unanchored from my old life. Not drifting, but finally free to choose my own direction. January dissolved into February, then March, each day building toward the final legal confrontation. The courthouse in downtown Minneapolis stood like a monument to other people's endings, but for me, it represented a beginning. The same building where Margaret had once presided over countless divorces would now host mine. The morning of June 15th arrived, gray and humid, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavy, except my heart. Carter appeared diminished in every way. His suit, clearly borrowed, hung loose on shoulders that had lost their arrogant set. His lawyer, a public defender who looked exhausted before proceedings even began, shuffled papers with the resignation of someone who knew this was just procedure. The embezzlement charges hovering over Carter's head removed any possibility of contest. He couldn't fight without risking criminal prosecution. The judge, a woman about Margaret's age with similar sharp eyes, reviewed the documents with efficiency. Mr. Lawson, do you contest any of the terms set forth in this dissolution? No, Your Honor. His voice cracked on the honorific. 12 minutes. That's all it took to legally dissolve 14 years. The gavel came down with a sound like punctuation at the end of a very long sentence. As we filed out, Carter lingered by the courthouse steps, his face working through emotions like he was trying to find the right one. I loved you once, he said, the words falling flat in the humid air. I paused, Margaret's wisdom flowing through me like inherited strength. No, you loved what I provided. The stability, the money, the cover for your inadequacies. There's a difference between loving someone and loving what they do for you. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked away. His figure grew smaller against the city backdrop until he turned a corner and vanished. I knew with absolute certainty I would never see him again, and the thought brought only peace, clean and complete, like the click of a well-oiled lock. 2 weeks later, Patricia Lawson called to arrange a visit. She arrived at my apartment carrying a leather case. I recognized the family jewelry she'd guarded throughout my marriage, like I might steal it. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it on my coffee table. I was wrong about you, she said without preamble, age having worn away her capacity for pretense. Wrong to treat you as less than. Wrong to raise a son who could... She stopped, composing herself. I failed him, and that failure hurt you. We sat across from each other, two women, examining the wreckage one man had created between them. She opened the case, revealing pieces I'd only seen in family photos. An Art Deco bracelet, pearl earrings from the 1920s, a sapphire ring that had belonged to Carter's grandmother. These should have been yours from the beginning, Patricia said. I withheld them out of snobbery, thinking you weren't good enough for our family. The truth is, we weren't good enough for you. We would never be friends. Too much history, too much hurt. But in that moment, we found understanding. She told me Carter was living with Denny now, working at an Enterprise rental car location near the airport, dating a woman named Jennifer who thought he was divorced because his wife had been unfaithful. I hope he's learned, Patricia said, though her tone suggested she knew better. You taught him the lesson I couldn't, that actions have consequences. Before leaving, she embraced me. Not the air kisses of 14 years, but a real hug. The kind that acknowledges shared pain. Thank you for not destroying him completely, she whispered against my ear. I only destroyed the fiction, I replied. The rest was always there, waiting to be exposed. By September, my consulting firm had tripled its client base. The story of the woman who locked out her life had become Minneapolis business legend. Female executives sought me out specifically, wanting the strategic mind that could orchestrate such a complete reversal of power. If you can plan a divorce like a military operation, one CEO told me over lunch, imagine what you can do for my merger. I moved offices to a building with windows that actually opened, a detail that felt monumentally important. Fresh air whenever I wanted it, no climate control beyond my own preferences. Margaret visited weekly, and together we'd founded something unexpected. The Lock Club, a support group for women learning to control their own doors, both literal and metaphorical. "We should write a book," Margaret suggested one afternoon, watching the group of 12 women sharing stories of escape and triumph. "Call it Changing the Locks, a guide to reclaiming your life." "Maybe," I said, though I was already thinking about chapter structure. The way truth could become instruction for others trapped behind doors they thought they couldn't change. Now, on this Tuesday morning in October, I stood in my apartment, truly, completely mine, watching another sunrise paint the city gold. The locks had evolved again. Smart locks controlled by my phone. A technology that felt symbolic. No physical keys to copy. No mechanical tumblers to pick. Just encrypted digital security I controlled completely. Harold still worked the front desk. Still called me Miss Thorne with obvious pride. Young women in the building sought me out for advice about relationships, careers, self-worth. Last week, a 28-year-old named Emma asked me the question I'd once asked myself. How do you know when it's time to leave? "When you realize the lock keeping you trapped isn't on any door," I told her, channeling Margaret's wisdom that had become my own. "It's in your belief that you need someone else's permission to be free. The moment you understand that, you already have the key." My phone buzzed. Another unknown number, probably Carter trying again through some app or borrowed phone. I deleted it without reading, without anger, without any emotion at all. Some doors, once locked, should remain that way. I made my coffee, 1 sugar, oat milk, prepared exactly how I preferred, and smiled at this small rebellion that had become routine. Freedom lived in these tiny choices as much as the dramatic ones. Every preference expressed, every boundary maintained, every decision made without seeking approval was another tumbler clicking into place in the lock of my own autonomy. The morning light caught the diamonds Margaret had given me, the ones that belonged to a man who'd understood partnership. They sparkled against my wrist as I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. To endings that become beginnings. To locks that protect instead of trap. To the woman I'd become by refusing to remain who I was expected to be. The lock that changed everything wasn't just on my door. It was the one I'd finally installed in my own heart, securing my worth from anyone who might try to diminish it again. And that lock, that one would never be changed. If this story of calculated revenge and reclaimed dignity had you cheering for Ruby, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Margaret delivered that devastating midnight toast, calling out Carter's presence with perfect judicial timing. What was your favorite moment of Ruby's transformation? Tell me what you think, I really want to know.